Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Truth About Teaching. If you could please just give me a hello or a thumbs up in the chat function in the bottom right to let me know you can see us and hear us okay, that'd be great. Brilliant, thank you. Well, the panelists today consist of Alison and Zishan. So thank you again for tuning in, and I'll hand over to the team. So enjoy the webinar.
Hi, guys.
Ali. Hi, everyone. Ali, ladies first.
Right, hello. Really pleased to meet you. My name's Ali, and I am part of the Explore teaching team. And as you can see, I have come armed with my very bright yellow hoodie, which is our brand colour. Z has been a little bit shyer tonight, which I don't think is normally him, but you know, we'll go with it. So I am an advisor, as I say. We're all experienced teachers in our team. So I taught for 27 years for my sins. I started when I was 27, so you can all work out how old I am. And I trained in primary. And then I had quite a weird career because I went into a PRU, which is a pupil referral unit. And then I went to be a Senko, and I was a Senko for many years in both primary and secondary. So I've done the full sort of taught from age 3 up to 18, which is a bit of a wide gap. But yeah, that's my basic background. Z?
Yes, I decided not to go with the pink background and the yellow hoodie today, but Ali, you're doing a fantastic job. So it looks wonderful. You're representing, which is good. So a little bit about myself. So I became a qualified teacher. We're talking about almost 2 decades ago. I qualified as a ICT teacher, but I did my degree in business IT. Very much interested in teaching computing and ICT. Did various different roles within the education sector. So was a head of department, Key Stage 3 coordinator for a while, and then decided to go into secondary school consultancy work, working within school improvement, which also allowed me to go into various different countries. So I worked in Abu Dhabi for about 2 years, worked in Malaysia for about 4 years for the Ministry of Education there. And so I've been in the education sector for now almost 2 decades, and it's been a wonderful journey so far. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, in fact, in this webinar, and we'll just kind of get into what teaching's about and what we found, good about teaching, what the highlights were and the lowlights were. So, so over to you, Ali. I'll let you ask or look at the first question that people have asked.
So, are there any questions in the chat yet? What I know the moderator has said, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. We're happy to answer any, and hopefully, it'll make it more personalised for people on this chat. But we'll start off with Z. What was your highlight of teaching, and what was your low light?
I came prepared to this webinar thinking that I'll have the answers in my head before I come to this webinar. And when you get into the webinar, you realize, actually, I'm not prepared at all. And I have so many things going through my head. It's a tough one, actually, Ali, because, there's so many highlights and you kind of wonder, well, what do I mention? And what do I talk about? I mean, there have been so many highlights. I think, without using, trying to avoid using cliches, but, those penny drop moments on a day-to-day basis that you get to see students or your class and really picking up the concepts and the topics. And it's just amazing to see that you are responsible for them understanding a certain topic or a certain subject, for example, and they take on board what you've taught them, and they begin to understand the concepts. And when you have those light bulb moments, I think that those were the highlights for me on a day-to-day basis. But if you're looking at long-term highlights, I think the long-term highlights are always when we get to the exam season and you think, wow, my students have excelled and they have done far better than I expected. And they come back to the school the next day or a week later and they say, sir, I got my results and they were just amazing, and thank you so much for being there for us. I mean, I can go on. I mean, the list is huge.
Absolutely, and it makes me think, because I mean in primary you don't have the exam results in the same
Mm,
way, but you
mm,
get those light bulb moments on sort of a daily basis of like a child really
mm,
like going, oh, I get it now, and
mm,
it's like, oh wow. But actually, you know, one of my big highlights was walking through town one day in near to where I taught, and this mum came up to me. And it was after about 10 years, after I'd been teaching about 10 years. And she went, oh, Miss Toll, you taught my son to read and he's never put a book down again. And you were the first person who got him to do that. And that
mm,
for me was like, yeah, that's what I went into teaching for. Because actually you want those lifelong skills, don't you? And you want people
mm,
to feel like they remember you for like a
mm,
really positive thing. So
mm,
yeah, I think yeah, and with you can't actually identify too many individual things because there's so many through it.
mm.
You get
But it's,
rewarded each day, don't you?
you do. It's just the positive impacts that you've talked about, and you know, having those conversations, even with the parents, and they're like, wow, you know, you've had such a positive impact on our child, and you know, I think often people don't realize actually we're not there just to teach. We're there to help people to become better citizens of society, and you know, to pick up transferable skills that will help them, you know, later in life. And like you said, there's just such a long list of things that we can you know, mention and talk about. But lowlights, I mean, there's quite a few of those as well, isn't there?
Mm.
I think for me in the beginning it was a very steep learning curve, and you know, we're on this webinar to be completely open and transparent, and you know, and be truthful. You know, it is a very steep learning curve, and you go into, like any other career, you know, when you're going into a new career, you have to learn the ropes and you have to understand what you're getting yourself into, and there is a steep learning curve. You have to understand, you know, the whole concept of teaching and learning, behavior management, workload, life, you know, work-life balance, for example. But I think that with time, those issues or perceived issues kind of disappear after a while. You know,
Well, I mean,
you
I think when I first started teaching, my biggest concern, and some of you will feel this, is will I be able to control a class? Will they mess
mm,
about? Will I lose control and I'll feel out of, you know, and initially you have moments like that where you have to call for help and sort of say, look, I need a bit of support on this because
mm,
you're learning how. But
mm,
by the end of my career, I could walk into any class and not say a word and they'd all go quiet.
mm,
Now that was sort of position within the school and sort of being an assistant head, but also the fact that I knew they would go quiet if I asked them to. So there was
mm,
almost sort of a mutual respect there that
mm,
you have that inner confidence that you build over time, don't you?
mm.
And you
Yeah.
start thinking, yeah, I can do this. So you stop feeling so stressed. And I think children can identify those sort of when you're feeling all a bit worried, they notice. Like they'd say, oh, Mrs. Church, you're tired today.
Mm,
And I'd say, well, it's Thursday. I'm always tired on a Thursday, you know, and things like
yeah.
that. But classes get to know you.
I mean, if,
And I think that's part of it.
I was going to say, if you had a top three, what would be the number one concern that you had before going into teaching?
I think it was that. I mean,
Yeah.
by trade, even though I'm in this bright yellow hoodie and pink background and look all wild and wacky, I'm quite a shy and quite sort of introverted character. And I thought that I wouldn't be able to raise my voice loudly enough to get over the top of them. Little did I know that actually standing there quietly is far better than shouting, shut up, be quiet, you know. But at the time, I think that was my biggest fear.
Mm,
Um, and then number two, I was worried I couldn't cope with the workload.
mm,
Um, but actually, I think they were my only worries. I was quite sure by the time I went into teaching that that was for me. And
mm.
once I'd been in school for 5 minutes, it just felt like I'd found home.
You were meant to be there. That
Yeah,
was you.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I mean, I fought against it for a long time.
Mm,
I mean, I can see in the chat some people have said, how much does your degree affect what you teach?
mm,
Well, I did media and culture,
mm,
um, and that isn't really something that you teach at secondary school. So I
mm,
suppose that guided me into primary.
mm,
But my overriding passion was always the special needs and SEND. Now that passion came from my mum, who had also been a Senko. So, and she used to talk about dyslexia and autism and all of these things. And I used to go into school with her on many occasions, and she'd introduce me to these children, and we'd be like, and I was so amazed and so like, that's what gave me so my degree didn't really affect what I taught. But obviously if you go into secondary, you'll know more about this, Z, but secondary, you need a relevance to your degree, really, because it's you're much more a specialist teacher. You're not teaching 12 or 13 subjects that you can't really get a specialism in. You're more doing you're doing one subject really well.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in my case, I did a business IT degree, and a lot of people will have degrees which don't actually fit into one subject area. So, for example, engineering is a good one where you'll cover a lot of maths and physics, and then you might decide actually which subject do I go for. In my case, I was thinking about going with the trend at the time, which was IT, and IT was booming, and you think ICT would be something really interesting to go into. However, my passion was always business. So I remember, I think it was my second school that I said to the school, basically, look, I've qualified as an ICT teacher, but my degree is in business IT. I have a passion for business as well. Is there any way that you can, include some business studies lessons? And they were really happy to accommodate. And so those who are considering secondary but have a passion for more than one subject, don't hesitate to speak to the school and say, look, I've actually qualified in this subject, but I've got a specialism and an interest in another subject as well. And in fact, schools look really highly upon that. They think, well, wow, this person has the ability to teach more than one subject. And so you're adding value, and you come across as a very appealing candidate, for the school. So it's
Yeah.
always a plus thing.
Well, my husband is a physics teacher by trade, so he trained as a physicist, but went into ICT later because there was a gap. And he said, "Oh, well, I've got an interest in that," so he went that way. And then, since being a deputy, and he does the timetabling at his secondary school, so he'll go, "Oh, well, I've got a gap for geography. I'll go and teach a session of geography this year, or I've got business, or I've got this, or I've got that." So the more flexible you can be, obviously the more secure your job is as well. I mean, teaching's a pretty secure job, let's face it. But
It is,
I
yeah.
think if there's a timetable gap and you're willing to have a go, once you can learn to teach and you've learned how to teach, actually, it doesn't matter what you're teaching. I mean, I wouldn't purport to go to A level and teach maths or physics or anything like that. That would be a disaster. But I did teach ICT at GCSE to a couple of girls at the Pru. And I am not an IT whiz at all. So it was a case of like ringing my husband, finding out information, learning it the night before, and then going in the next day. So it is about those techniques of teaching, and then what you teach is sort of secondary in a way, isn't it?
It is.
So
Yeah.
in here, Z, which teacher training route did you go down? So which one did you choose?
So in my time, there was only two options. There was the GTP, which was called the Graduate Teacher Program, which is quite similar to the School Direct program that we have now. And then we had the University PGC, and I went for the University PGC because it was a lot more familiar. People were a lot more familiar with that route, and I wanted that PGC qualification as well because I was always interested in teaching abroad. So, I did my University PGC in ICT, which was quite nice.
Yeah, and when I did it, there wasn't a choice. There was
Oh,
university or nothing. Never even heard of GTP at that point. So I went to university. I was more than happy to do that because, like Z, I wanted the PGCE because that gives you the understanding of why we teach like we do. And I suppose I'm quite analytical like that. So I wanted to get to the nitty gritty. And I mean, my bookcase is still full of books of sort of how you teach and why you teach and what you teach and
same.
things like that. Yeah, because it sort of it interested me. And as trends change in teaching, they do go round and round, but they do change over time. And I was always quite interested to see why and how that would change.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's a good point. And going into the next question, actually, I think this fits in very nicely because you went through the PGC. And sometimes we get this question asked whether there is any sort of potential to get up the career ladder quicker if you have a PGC, or if against going for a school direct salaried place, for example, which doesn't include a PGC. But in terms of your career, how did you progress in your teaching career?
I think I was very lucky, but I don't know whether it was just because I put myself out there. But I started when I was 27, so I went in after being a printer. So I'd totally gone away from teaching. My parents had been teachers, like I said, and I wanted to step out and do something different. But about 6 years in, I was feeling really quite jealous, not of and not particularly of the holidays. So I must say that was a bit of a pull, but it was more about them talking about the children, talking about experiences, those sort of changes. And I was a bit fed up of making money for other people. And I wanted to do something that had a bit of I don't know, a moral sense to it. Does that sound really high and mighty? It does a bit, but you
No.
know what I mean.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, so I went in. You didn't have NQT time then, so you didn't have a newly qualified teacher, and you certainly didn't have the early career teacher program you have now. So I was put in. Luckily, I had a very good partner. But I went into PE coordination after a year, because everybody in those days, you had to coordinate a subject. So they just said, right, coordinate a subject. So that was my first sort of promotion, I suppose. And then the Senko was leaving, and I said, oh, I'm interested. And they went, well, you've only been teaching 2 years. Are you sure? And I said, well, interview me and see. And I interviewed, and they gave me a temporary 1 year, and then they transferred it into permanent. Then I went as a deputy head at a new school within 4 years of training. I was deputy. And then I went and had 4 children for my sins. So I took quite a lot of time off. And that's when I was doing the pre-work and working part-time with lots of different people. Then I went in and gradually, but yeah, was a deputy and an assistant head in a secondary school. So, but also worked as a consultant like you did, see, walking, going around and supporting other people with SEND. And then, yeah, done lots of bits, because I think what happens in teaching is that opportunities come up and it's like, oh, I fancy that. And you've just got to go for it. And
Absolutely.
if you do your homework, usually there is an opportunity out there for you.
Definitely.
And it's worked out that way.
If you had to decide on one particular role that you had in sort of previous years, which one would you say would be the one that you enjoyed the most?
I was a Senko in a local primary school which was it had 4 classes in each year group, so it was a large primary school. But I was the inclusion manager, so I was the safeguarding lead, the behaviour lead, the Senko, the medical lead. It all sort of embraced all of those. And I loved that, because I really felt that I had an impact on not only the children, but the teachers, because I did an awful lot of teacher training, and that was my real passion. And that became the thing that I loved most, teaching teachers how to teach. So yeah, I think, but also having that connection with the children, so I wasn't completely removed from them. Yeah, what about you?
So kind of a strange journey. Once I've qualified, I started working, and I was actually working in a unofficial capacity as a Key Stage 3 coordinator. So they didn't officially give me that title, but I was doing the role as a Key Stage 3 coordinator. And I quickly realized that this is something I really enjoy, but I'm not getting paid extra for it. And so I've got to look at opportunities, and I stayed there for a bit. And then there was an opportunity to be a second in department in another school, and I thought, this is a really good opportunity. I need to jump on this chance. But before I went for that school, it's funny, we were talking about subjects, and I went for an interview for another position, and it's really strange, because I went for the interview for the ICT teacher, and immediately at the end of the interview they said, we'd love to offer you the job, however, you're going to have to teach some maths. I'm like, where did that come from? I I've interviewed for an ICT teacher, and all of a sudden you're saying to me I need to teach maths. So yeah, I had to say no to them and went on to this other school which had a second in department position, and that was really good because that kind of gave me a good foundation and a good understanding of what a role of a head of department would be if you're working, under their supervision. And so the natural progression after that would have been a head of department. But I did the head of department straight after that. And I did that for a while, and then I realized actually now I'm itching to do something sort of further. And instead of going for an assistant head or a deputy head, which I would have loved to do actually, this opportunity came up for a school improvement position or advisory role, and that was abroad in Abu Dhabi. And I did that for a while, and that was a really, really enjoyable experience because you're working within a different country, different culture, different background, and it's really good. It, opens your horizons, and it really opens your eyes to the possibilities of how education is seen, or how teaching and learning looks like in different countries. And then after that, I came back to the UK. I was getting a bit homesick and came back. And back in those days, there was an organization called the TDA. I don't know if Ali, you remember.
Oh yeah.
The Training and Development Agency, which got dissolved, and then the DFE obviously is the entity that we work for. But so worked with them for a while, and I was actually working as an advisor for them, as someone who helps people to get into teaching, very similar to what we're doing right now. And then after that, again, got itchy feet and decided to jump on this opportunity to work on school improvement in Malaysia. And so I was there for a few years, and that was really nice because we were working with these kind of local villages and helping and supporting and building capacity there, and that was a really good experience. Yes, if I had to choose,
there's so many opportunities, aren't there?
there is,
It's
and this
just
is the beauty of the education sector. Once you're a qualified teacher, there is so many different avenues you can go into. I think there's misconception of once you're a qualified teacher, you're in the classroom for the rest of your life. No, actually, there's so many other
absolutely
areas that you can look into.
there are. Yeah.
Um,
So which was your favourite out of all of those?
I think it has to be Malaysia, and the reason is because I was working with very deprived areas, and that was one of the key reasons I went into teaching in the first place, because I wanted to work within schools which were in deprived areas, looking at being a role model for those who come from ethnic minority backgrounds, because the reality is when I was in school, there weren't many teachers from the ethnic minority background and or black or ethnic minority background, and so I was thinking that it would be really nice to have more inclusion in the school environment. So that's the reason I went into teaching, and I
Yeah.
wanted to give something back, to be honest. So
Yeah, and I've always preferred. I've worked in schools that have been very well to do with children with no sort of financial barriers, or and unfortunately probably very white and middle class schools in sort of that way. But I actually preferred schools that were much more mixed and variety,
mm,
partly because I'm into inclusion and I want to see that, but
mm,
also I felt I was doing so much better
mm,
because I was really moving children on and giving them options
mm,
out of poverty and out of deprivation and things like that. And I think that gave me a real buzz.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's an interesting one. I
mm,
also found, and this is my personal, that the teachers in those schools were much more supportive of each other because it was almost like, look, we've got a really hard job here,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
let's all pull together and let's all,
mm,
and that real camaraderie that you can get in a brilliant school
yeah.
is, you can't beat it, can you really?
No, it's just that sense of
Um,
community. It's really good. It is really good.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Let me just check. So we talked about the routes. There are different ways into teaching now. So both Z and I went the PGCE university route.
mm,
There are, you can now go through a school direct route. So school-centred ITT is a thing. There are salaried and unsalaried routes, such as teaching apprenticeships, which is a new thing that's come out. And that's starting to gain momentum. There's no real hierarchy, would you say, Z, about the different routes? I think it doesn't matter at all which way you choose. It's actually, it's important that you look at the different options and see which one works for you. Because once you've got the qualified teaching status, it really doesn't matter how you got that. It's the fact that you're there and taking the opportunities and just being a really good teacher, I think will come out.
I absolutely agree. I think that, and going back to what I mentioned before, I've had lots of questions in the past about, will I be able to progress in my career a lot quicker if I had a PGC or not, or if I went for a specific, pathway or specific route into teaching? No, I mean, from what I've seen in my own experience, the schools would want to see if you are a good teacher. They want to see if you can add value to their school, and you have all the qualities and the skill sets and the transferable skills that you need to become a successful teacher. They, in my opinion, from my experience, I've never seen any school or any teacher or head teacher or assistant head or deputy head look at, well, why do you have a PGC and why does this person have or have they gone down a GTP route or a school direct route? It doesn't really play a significant decision making part of the decision making.
And like that, you can go on a BA route and do a BA or a BSc with the qualified teacher status incorporated into that, which is a 3-year course. So if any of you are sort of, A level or you haven't got a degree yet, that might be an option that you look at. And all of them are the same. You end up understanding teaching and you learn on the job. And I think teaching's a lifelong learning experience in my mind. I don't think I ever stopped, and that was sort of knowledge and understanding of content, but also how to teach never really stopped. So yeah, and I think one thing to mention as well is a lot of schools are very pro getting you extra qualifications if you want that. So I went and got my specialist teacher qualification in SEN. I also did lots and lots of courses because all schools have a training budget, and you can go off and do lots of different things, and a lot of heads really like that because it's showing that you're interested, and then you can go back and teach other teachers what you've learned, and there's lots of sort of mechanisms. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's the same with me actually. I took the opportunity to do various different courses, working in a team, managing a team, leadership skills, etc. And there's lots of courses that are available. And when you do become a qualified teacher, don't hesitate to ask. Speak to the school and say, I have an interest in this particular area. Please, is there any way that I can jump onto a course? If you don't ask, you don't get. So
yeah, and a PGCE is worth a third of a master's, isn't it? So
correct.
some schools will actually do a salary sacrifice scheme where they say, right, I want to do my master's, can you help me out because they're expensive, and they'll help you out or pay towards it and things like that. And I've always had that opportunity to do that, and I don't think that's going away. I think that is very much about checking out your school where you apply to and things like that. And at your interview, that's one of the things I will be asking to find that out. There's a question here, Z. I don't know whether you've seen it. To what extent do you think teachers are effective compared to teachers 10 years or 20 years ago?
Well, we're here, aren't we? So they must have done something right, which is why we're sitting here and have qualifications and gone into teaching ourselves. I don't know. It's a tricky one. I think with times you adapt and we learn a lot more. I think, like you said, it's a lifelong learning thing. With time you get better and you understand a lot more. A lot more technology has come our way. A lot more information, accessibility to information. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
What I do notice is that schools are much more research-led now. And, a lot of the schools I've been in the last sort of 10 years are talking about go and have research time or go and check out. I was talking about the books on my bookcase, finding out about how to teach and why to teach. And I think it's got a lot more methodical in a way. Whereas when I first went to teaching, I remember them just saying, well, you teach and this is content and decide how you teach. I didn't know anything about intermediate learning or maths mastery and all these sort of terms that have come come about, but whether that will go full circle. But I was a child of the 70s where you sat and did a topic for the whole of the year 6. So when I was at school, I just sat on my own working, and the teacher would occasionally mark the work. Now, is that effective? I learnt. I did really well. I don't know about those children that probably couldn't do that on their own. It worked for my learning style. I don't think it was a very inclusive way of learning. And I think that's become much more pro, hasn't it? That, you know, you have to think about personalising learning and thinking about why you're doing it.
Yeah, and I think that also, I mean, we had internet 20 years ago, but we didn't have as many resources, and we didn't have that sort of opportunity to find out what other people, what other countries are doing, and then a lot of it has kind of seeped through. You know, we've had. I remember having a conversation about, you know, the way maths is taught in different countries, in Asia, for example, and how effective that can be, and we wouldn't have those conversations 20 years ago because that information wasn't accessible. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's lots of areas. I mean, we're constantly learning. We're constantly learning, and we're trying to adapt. So,
I mean, people don't know how brains all work yet, do they? And all the different sort of ways that children adapt to things. I mean, COVID has been a massive learning curve for teachers, and I think, and how we now can do a webinar. I mean, I'm not saying I'm IT literate, but, you know, 3 years ago, I don't think I'd even heard the term, let alone been on one. So
yeah.
we're learning all these different ways of doing different things, aren't we, all the
Yeah.
time? And that's a positive thing about, I think, about teaching, really.
100%. And I think the whole reason, you know, for us to learn is so that we can obviously help our students and get the most out of it. And I think that, you know, during our career, and this is a question we're going to jump onto the next question. I'm going to ask you this question. Throughout this whole process of you teaching, you've obviously gone through the process of becoming a qualified teacher, and you've gone into the classroom and you've taught students. But what has teaching taught you, Ali?
Oh, that you don't know anything. That actually,
I
I mean,
agree.
because I'll say, you know, I'll say to the children, well, you know much more about this bit than I do. But actually accepting that you don't know everything, and being quite humble. I think I
Yeah.
needed to be taught to be you know, a bit of humility didn't do me any harm.
Well,
What about you?
yes, there's lots of things that you just mentioned that I agree with, absolutely agree with. I think that for me, I think in recent years, you know, this whole topic of the emotional intelligence has come to the fore, and you know, a lot of people are looking into this sort of area in a lot of depth. I think teaching for me generally has taught me a lot more empathy. You know, in the first school that I started working in, I realized that there were lots of kids who were students that were going through so much difficulty at home, outside of school, and you begin to realize that there's so much more that's happening outside the classroom, and to have that understanding and have that empathy for the students, and to understand where they're coming from and understanding their backgrounds and having those conversations with them, and that for me was a really good way to understand how to deal with these kind of scenarios so that I can actually utilize that in my jobs that I do in the future. And also as a father, I think, you know, understanding, you know, when a child is going through a difficulty and they don't seem to communicate that effectively because of whatever reason, you know, how do you react to that, and how do you support them, and how do you help them and get them through that difficulty? I think a lot of that's come through teaching for me, to be honest. And
And
even
when I've
now.
got it wrong with my kids, I've sort of looked and thought, I wouldn't do that in the classroom. Why am I doing it at home? And you sort of, because
Absolutely,
you
yeah.
know, lose your temper, don't you? And then in the classroom, I don't think I lost my temper very often. Occasionally I acted as if I did. Now that's a bit wrong, but it's like, it's sort of that pretend, isn't it, of right, I'm getting serious now, guys. You know, you've got to do what I'm saying. This is not a joke anymore. But yeah, and actually that awful myth about don't smile until Christmas. In my first year, I tried really hard, but the kids kept making me laugh. And you know, they'd say funny things, so I couldn't ever do it. So I remember like sitting back and thinking, right, this isn't going to work for me being a serious, strict teacher. I'm going to have to find a different way. And I did. And actually, it was building relationships, like you say. It's finding out about them and their individuality, and trying to show a bit of respect to them as well as them to you. And you get that mutual benefit then, don't you?
Absolutely. And what you just said about building relationships, I think that was the key for me, you know, building that rapport, having that understanding. I think my university tutor for my PGC, Chris, what a wonderful guy. It's such an amazing character. He came into the first lecture juggling balls and kind of entertaining us like a clown, and they just instantly captured our attention, and it was just absolutely amazing. And it was very much about building relationships. It was, you know, building that rapport so that students feel comfortable to come and approach you about issues that they are facing. And for me, that was the key thing. I mean, I think for me that was the best thing about, you know, teaching, and that's what teaching taught me, and on how to deal with different types of people, how to interact with different types of people, how to respect, you know, different people's different backgrounds and different you know, thought processes and whatever, and learning how to adapt. And again, for me to work in different types of schools in different locations, and even in different countries, you know, it really does broaden your horizons, and you realize that, you know, you have to become adaptable. And when you do become a teacher, you realize that every class is different. A year 7 class will be completely different to a year 10 class, so you have to adapt, and you have to adapt your teaching style. You have to adapt the way you speak to them. I mean, having a good conversation and having a bit of banter and a bit of joke with year 11 students is completely possible, but maybe not so with the year 7 classes, who are very young, who've just come from primary school, and they're very concerned about this big school that they've just joined, and they have these anxieties, and so you have to kind of ease them into the whole process. So
Yeah. And as a primary school teacher, mine's opposite. So I would say, oh, I could have loads of jokes and laughs with year 6s, because when they're in year 6, these children are very grown up, and they are the top of the school, and they are the cocky little monsters, and they think everything's doing, you know, and they are totally confident. And then they go into secondary school and they turn into little children again. And you know, I remember going to secondary and thinking, gosh, you know, when I was in primary, I'd be like chatting to you like a normal adult, and now I'm talking to you like you're a child, because you almost adapt to your circumstances all the time, don't you? Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved teaching in nursery. You know, that was amazing, because the children develop their language so incredibly quickly, you know, and taking in big sort of wet fish and just slopping them down and saying, explore. And they'd be like so excited, and you get all the sort of emotions, and it just silly things that you can just do with kids. You've just got to be a bit creative, haven't you?
You're making me want to go back into the classroom immediately now. I do miss that. I do miss that.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to the next question. You know, what do you enjoy about the current role? Because our current role as an Explore teaching advisor is very different to working in a school. We're not actually working in a school anymore. We have worked in a school for many years, but I mean, what do you enjoy about this role compared to, you know, having worked as a teacher?
Oh, I suppose it's calmer. I can probably plan my day out and know what it's going to look like, whereas in
Mm,
teaching I didn't. But
mm,
I mean, that is a positive. It can also be a negative for me, because
mm,
I get bored very, very easily,
mm,
and my brain is constantly thinking about what the next thing is. So I like to go on lots of events. So our service is quite cool, because we can go off to universities and meet lots of students and do different events and talk to them, and you know, be that face of the DFE, I suppose, and I really enjoy that. I like traveling around the country and meeting just different people with different experiences. And that might be students, or it might be like, I met a guy at Huddersfield the other day that was the finance guru at the university, and we were like having a chat, and I just thought, oh, it's really good to have. It's just relationship building, isn't it? I'm back to the stuff that I liked as a teacher, meeting people and finding out their stories, I suppose.
It's the same with
What
me.
about you?
Yeah, it's the same with me. It's about building that relationship, getting to know students who are potentially thinking about going into teaching, and just to have those conversations. It's just, again, going back to what you said, it's about building that relationship, building that rapport. And I think our service is quite unique in the sense that, we do help people through that journey, of exploring a career in teaching. And so we will be there to answer any questions that they have, and to help them through any concerns that they have and worries that they have. We've had the same concerns and worries that, before we went into teaching, and there was no service like this available at that time. And in fact, I remember when I was doing my application for teacher training and preparing for my interview, I was really nervous because I came from a corporate. When I graduated, I went into the IT industry, so I used to work in the IT sector, and that was very sort of cutthroat. You're always constantly on the go, and you're dealing with so many different people, and you don't have time to collect your thoughts in a way. And to come from that to teaching, it was a sort of a big difference. But just because I was so used to working in the IT sector, I thought, going into an interview for a teaching job, piece of cake, be an absolutely easy thing for me. But I was so nervous. I was so anxious. I was concerned. What do I do? What do I say? How will I answer this question? And I wish I had this service then. Someone to talk to and bounce ideas off. And so now that when I speak to someone who's thinking about going into teaching, I'm like, yeah, I'm giving you that support that I wanted when I was considering teaching, about 20 years ago. So yeah, so again, going back to what you said, it is about having that sense of achievement, because you are now helping people get into teaching, and that will obviously help students in the future.
And I like the fact that I'm using skills that I've built up in teaching. I'm using that knowledge even though I've left teaching. I just feel like I'm still in that zone, and I really get it, and and hopefully sort of give people a realistic view of it. So when you're thinking about teaching, a lot of students have come to me and said, but it's not very well paid. What did you find? Do you think, did you feel well off? Did you feel okay? What was it?
Yeah, it wasn't. Again, in those days, there was this whole sort of, again, misconception. Those who can't, they teach. It's like, okay, and if I can't do anything else, I'll go into teaching. Wait, it's just the complete opposite. I wanted to go into teaching after I considered it for a while, because I used to help and support a lot of my colleagues when I was working in the IT sector, and the IT sector was very well paid at that time, and it was booming. And I was thinking, I'm going to take a massive pay cut. But then you realize when you go into teaching, you go into the main pay scale, and that increments each year. And then any additional responsibility you take, that will be an additional lump sum of money on top of your base salary. So again, there's so much room to grow within the education sector. And again, we said this right at the beginning, that there's so many other avenues that you can look into once you're a qualified teacher. And if you're working in, let's say, in a busy inner city secondary school with, let's say, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 students or whatever, and you're head of a department, for example, that would be a good fair chunk of money on top of your base salary. And then you've got the upper pay scales, and then you've got the leadership scales as well. And there's room to grow within the education sector, like any other career.
I've never felt, I mean, like you, I was in industry in London, so I was earning a lot of money, and everyone said, what are you doing going into teaching? You could, and I was actually offered a job to go to Hong Kong when I left printing, and that was going to be an even bigger sum, and I was going to be abroad, and everyone's like, I don't understand what you're doing. And I went in, and I've never looked back, actually, and because I've always taken opportunities to grow and develop and all of that, I've never found it a problem. And I I mean, now you go in at 28, don't you, at the moment, for anyone who's not sure. And then from September, that's going to 30,000 as a starting, which isn't, you know, is about average for a graduate. A lot of graduates are on a lot less than that. And of course, you go up. We were having this debate in our chat. How often do you go up? You know, so you go up annually for at least 6 years. And most schools let you go up automatically, but it is technically it's performance related. So you tend to have performance management. But I found, I don't know about you, Z, but as long as you were doing the job in your early years and just doing what they, you know, they asked you and you did a bit extra because you wanted to, that's sort of almost guaranteed that you would go over, you know, into the next bit. And then the threshold was dead easy to do. It just sort of, it was what we were doing anyway, really. So, yeah.
I think something significantly, something massive or something significant has to go wrong for you not to jump up the pay scale. I think if you're doing the job and you are helping your students and you are helping the students progress and you are doing what you're meant to be doing as a teacher, I don't see any concerns of, you know, getting up the pay scale or the salary.
No, and I think one of the learning, I suppose one of the learning things that I had to do was make sure that I asked for help, that I didn't know it all. And, you know, like I said, I didn't know it all, but asking for help and saying, look, this bit's worrying me, or I can't quite do that. Can you show me how? Or is there any training I can go on to help me? And just the fact that you're asking, people feel that you're interested and that you're open to new ideas. That in itself is enough in teaching in the early years to just keep you ticking over, because you just want to keep on top of it and you're not having any major problems. You know, and there are always people willing to help. You know, I think it's a very helpful, supportive industry from my experience.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Ali, I was just going to say, I think we've covered the questions that we were sent through, but I can see there's about 10 questions in the question box.
Yes,
Shall
so I've
we?
gone, let's just have a look. So hello, these some hellos. I think as I've gone through, I've looked at most of them, Z. How much
So if you
did
look,
you degree? We talked about that. Oh,
oh,
DBS check.
yeah.
It says, how do I get the extended DBS check for a self-employed tutor? Oh, that's a little bit out of our remit. I don't know whether you know. I mean, it will just be applying like normal to the DBS. You can get DBSs that are mobile, so you can go into different environments. You just have to click the right one. Whether there's a backlog at the moment, good question. If you're waiting for that since January, I would chase them. Because that should have been done by now. I know on the
Yeah.
internships that are happening, people are applying for DBSs from the school for those people now, and they'll be in school in a month. So really, month to 6 weeks, I would have said, Z, wouldn't you?
I think so. I think so. That sounds about right.
Yeah, it's
Ali, so there's a tab at the bottom which says questions. I think that's a different window for questions.
okay.
So I've just looked at the first one, which is very interesting, and I think I'm going to take a stab at answering this one. And this is a really good
I've got
question.
it
It
now.
says,
Yeah.
do you think that the rapidly developing artificial intelligence will replace teachers in the future? I mean, I see students using ChatGPT already, right? So
Yeah.
to create their own assignments and stuff. Do I think it's going to replace teachers? No, because you know we were talking about these kind of light bulb moments. You can have a textbook and you can have all this information in front of you, but sometimes you require that person with the knowledge and the understanding to really make you understand. It's like, okay, well, you know, I can jump into a car, which is an auto drive car, and they can facilitate my driving, but listening to someone with instructions and life experience, I think counts for a lot. Yes, there may be an opportunity where AI replaces certain elements of, you know, the job, but teachers will always be required and teachers will always be there to help and support.
I think COVID absolutely brought that home for me as well, because
Mm,
there was nothing. I mean, we all did webinar teaching. We were all on there, you know, and I was doing these daily lessons with classes. It had nothing, no feeling about it compared to being in that classroom with those individuals. And even
mm,
though that was human to human, you know, it's those relationships, and it's understanding those personal. Will that AI understand that that child's got up this morning in a bad mood?
Absolutely.
Have they had an
100%.
argument with their mum on the way to school? Have they dropped their apple as they've walked into class and they're hungry? You know, all those little things. I think we're a way off AI being able to cover that side of teaching, which is actually the bit that makes us human and makes us understand and also adapt our learning to those children. So
Absolutely.
I hope not, is my argument, really, and I don't think it can, if
Yeah,
I'm truly honest.
I
But
don't
don't
think I
quote
could have
me
answered.
in 50 years' time.
Well, I don't think I could. I don't think I could have answered the question better than that. I think you're absolutely right, and you hit the nail on the head. And because you've hit the nail on the head, I'm going to give you the next question as well. It
Oh,
says it's a primary school question. So it says, I'm studying a master's or an MSc in TESOL and graduated in September. How can you advise me to become a primary school teacher? I think there's lots of information that we need in order to be able to answer this question, right?
absolutely. And one of the things I would say is sign up for our advisory service, because it sounds like you've got lots going on there that would be
Mm,
really useful to do.
mm,
I mean, if you've got an MSc and it's TESOL, it's what your subject area would be. But for primary and for secondary, you need to do an initial teacher training course, even though you've got TESOL, because TESOL hasn't got that qualified teacher status associated with it, unless you can tell me differently, Timar. So you can look at the different providers. Obviously, your MSc with TESOL will be really useful and great evidence. And it depends whether you've used it for some school experience and whether you've been practicing TESOL with any students. All of that will have a bit of an impact on it. All positive, but you
mm.
will probably still need to do an initial teacher training course. Sign up for an advisor through the Get Into Teaching site, and we can go through your personal needs, because it's whether you've got the GCSE in English and maths or equivalent that you need. And you also need science GCSE or equivalent for being a primary school teacher. You need a degree, which you're studying for. And then it's about getting that qualified teacher status. But there are different ways for you to do that depending on your past experiences. Do you think I've
Abs-
covered that, Z?
I think you've covered that perfectly well. Yeah, absolutely. The next question is, oh, I've lost the window. If
Did
you
you
can
find
read the
it?
next one.
Well, you can answer this one. Did you find that a job in education was able to support you financially? I think we spoke about that a bit, didn't we?
I think we covered that. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of
Yeah.
areas to grow, and the pay scales go up, and there is lots of opportunities to take on various different roles, which will give you TLR, teaching and learning. I always forget.
Recruitment points, yeah, or
Points. Yeah,
retention points.
retention. Yeah. Workload, life balance. I think we've spoken about as well. I think one thing I will mention in this area is that, as I was saying right at the beginning, it is a steep learning curve, and then you quickly realize that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's so much resources available. You've got so many colleagues within the school that have done lots of things already. It is about sharing best practice. It is about recycling a lot of the work that you've done previously, so that you don't sit there hours and hours and hours planning for lessons which you don't really need to do because someone's done it already for you, and you just have to adapt and adjust. And what I found personally for myself was I used to use a lot of the time in between lessons, when I've got a free period or I've got lunch or break, I would use a little bit of time to do my marking. And then if you treat it like a 9 to 5, in the sense that if school finishes about 3:30, you stay for another hour and a half until 5:30, for example, and you get your work done and you go home to no work. But yes, there are periods in the year where you will need to take some time out in the evenings and the weekends to mark and prepare for exam preparations and mark assignments, for example. But then equally, you are given plenty of holidays
And you're
to to
also,
to,
I mean, the good thing
to
about the
support that.
workload is you choose when you do that extra work. So
Mm,
I'm an early bird. So on a Sunday morning, I would get up at like 6, and that sounds horrendous to some people, but I'd get
mm,
up at 6 and do 2 or 3 hours then. And then that would sort me out for, a good proportion of the week. on top of like anything else I needed to do. But it also meant that when my children woke up at sort of 10 o'clock, I was there for them, and my work was out of the way, and I could stop stressing about it. There have been times when I've done a massive workload, but I actually worked with the DFE before I came on this job on a workload reduction toolkit. And there's lots and lots of good practice out there, and lots of good ideas for reducing workload, like live marking when the kids are in the room, feeding back to the kids. That's all been shown to be much better than marking books remotely till 10 o'clock at night, you know. And again, it's about going back to the school, to your school, and saying, what are your policies on marking? What are your policies on people staying? Is there a culture of working for hours on end on nothing in particular, or is there a culture of let's be smart and get it done, and like Z says, you know, use each other's work? So, you know, different schools, every different school that I've been in has a very different culture and a very different sort of idea about them, and you need to do your homework before you take those jobs of how they're going to treat you and how your work-life balance works. But yes, it is perfectly manageable. You've got to take control of it and do what works for you.
Absolutely. Ali, I'm conscious that we don't have much time, so
We've
we'll
got
try
about
getting
3
through
minutes,
these.
haven't we?
Yeah. Really quick question to answer to Simone, who asked about Teach First. I would say that it depends on you. It depends on if that's the kind of teacher training route that you want to take. I would say that once you've signed up to an advisor, they can give you more insight into the different routes into teaching. Ali, the next one is the next one we've answered already. Do you know the
did
dates
that
for the
one,
summer?
didn't we? I think that came into the chat.
Yeah.
Do you
Do you
know
know
the
the dates
date?
for this? Go on, sorry, Ali, go on.
Sorry, do you know the dates for the summer internships? Each of the schools are doing 3 weeks. They are all around about the end of July, end of June, beginning of July, but there is a slight slippage. The best thing to do is go onto the Get Into Teaching website and search teaching internships, and it will come up. You are quite late in, if you want to apply now, by all means do it, because there are some spaces, but you might find that when you go onto that site, you want to ring the schools and find out whether they've still got places, and they'll give you more detail, but they will be happening again next year.
Okay, thank you, Ali. The other one is managing, balancing and managing teaching life. We've covered that already. About recycling work and doing that. As a teacher, would you allow your kids to attend the same school where you would teach, possibly be in your?
So I was in my mum's class for a little bit when I was at school. Weird and wonderful. My children have considered whether they go to my husband's school, but have said no, they won't, because he's in charge of behaviour, and they didn't want to be singled out for being, goody two shoes or not. And also, I just think there's a lot of pressure on them. But lots and lots of parents do have their children at school, especially in primary, and it works really, really well. So do what works for you, I think, is the answer for me.
Yeah,
What
for
about
me,
you?
for me, I would say for primary school that would be fine. But my son is very embarrassed to be around his parents, so I don't think I could teach him at secondary school level. So I suppose it's a bit a case by case. What was your teaching philosophy and technology philosophy to you both? I would say that we don't have time to answer that question at this time. However,
I think it's come out. I think our teaching philosophy is very
it
much
has somewhat,
about
yeah,
inclusion
it
and
is. Yeah, I agree,
relationships,
absolutely.
and doing that, isn't it?
I've just
Technology philosophy. Oh, yeah, I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time. I have actually put a link to the Get Into Teaching website where you can sign up to an advisor if you do want an advisor to get more information. You just have to fill in that form, and then someone will be in touch with you, and hopefully you get assigned an advisor within a week, within five working days. I think it's best now to transfer over to our lovely presenter who was around the background somewhere, Connor.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, thank you again so much to our guest speakers for their obviously valuable information. I'm just going to put on screen a link to your target jobs page.
Fabulous.
We'll obviously take 1 second.
I think we did really well, Ali. Wrapped up exactly at 5 o'clock.
Can you both see that on the screen?
That's because you shut me up at the right time.
Yes, I can see that, Connor. Yeah.
Right, perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, that'll take you through to the Target Jobs page where you can see any upcoming opportunities and events like this one. So feel free to click on that and then follow the Department for Education on Target Jobs. Yeah, just so you're all aware, we run webinars very regularly on all those different subjects. The next one will be on Thursday, which is tomorrow, on how to kickstart your consulting career. So go to our Target Jobs page and sign up for that one in the events section. Thank you again to you guys and everyone for watching, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you,
Thanks
Connor.
very
Thank you for having
much.
us.
Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.